What's it like behind the scenes at Coutts then? Have they got a political bias? Is that representative of the banking industry as a whole, do you think?
Well, the first thing to remember is that it is a very old organisation. It's older than the Bank of England. So seriously old organisation. To change anything takes forever. And certainly, I worked in the Chief Executive's office for almost 2 years, 2013 to 2015. I would not have said it had a political culture then. But one thing I find very interesting is that Alison Rose was then the division head of Coutts. Coutts was in something called the Wealth Division. Alison Rose was appointed to look after the Wealth Division, and then she was obviously later appointed to be Group Chief Executive when it was renamed NatWest, obviously formerly was RBS.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have said there was a political agenda as such, but Alison Rose was always very ambitious. It was quite clear that she had her eyes on the top job. And in terms of this story, she really does know Coutts very well because she was responsible for it before she was chief executive. There's always this mystery about Coutts because of its age, it's older than the Bank of England. It's got this mystery of who it banks, who its clients are. And I think she always liked that. OK,
look, Oliver, why should your average Joe on the street, who will never accumulate enough wealth to go anywhere near Coutts, why should we care?
Well, the first thing to say there is that Coutts has about 100,000 customers, and many of them don't qualify for an account. If you applied today's rules about eligibility, they wouldn't qualify. Right. And yet the bank continues to bank them. So what I found interesting about the Farage story is why they should suddenly decide that, well, we've got probably about 30 or 40,000 clients who don't qualify, but they're happy to keep 39,999 and then decide, well, actually, Nigel Farage, we're going to boot out.
Yeah.
The largest client segment is staff. So that the single largest group of accounts are held by staff, hardly any of whom would actually qualify for an account. But more broadly, I left Coutts to write a book about George Orwell, obviously big figure in terms of totalitarianism, council culture. So I went around the world visiting everywhere he lived. It's called the Orwell Tour. And one of the things that I think is so relevant about Orwell is that he warned us what society would be like if you gave too much power to certain institutions and to certain behaviours and values. Orwell used to speak of unpersons. So the Ministry of Truth would cancel people because their views ran counter to what was accepted by the totalitarian state. Now, we teach 1984 in our schools. We warn our students, this is what can happen if you give too much power to your state. And yet we have organisation after organisation, which includes now Coutts Bank and the banking system, deciding who to unperson and who they would agree to keep servicing based on their political views. It really is terrifying.
Yeah, it is very, very chilling. And even some of the statements in Nigel Farage's Coutts files, such as, we acknowledge completely that there was absolutely nothing criminal, that they are in charge of, I would imagine, at least most of his money. So they will, better than anybody, have been able to see whether or not, Putin was giving him backhanders or anything, which, of course, he wasn't. And so they can acknowledge that nothing was actually going wrong, but they were just articles about whether or not it was. But they would have been ideally placed to have hit back and gone, well, this is absolute rubbish, of course. The other concern that I would have, Oliver, is once you put all your assets in something or you put all your money somewhere, and then the norms and values of a society change, and then potentially the norms and values of that corporation change, and you then don't match those norms and values, you are in a massive position of personal weakness because you have given them everything that you own, and then you are at their mercy, just frankly, whichever way the wind blows.
Well, you mentioned the illegality, which I used to look at a lot of PEP reports. So a pile would be on my desk of people. I would read them before I then discuss them with the then chief executive, a gentleman called Rory Tapner. And there would be people whose banking relationship we were ending, people who were applying for an account, and we would decline them. And the reasons given would be, I don't know, they're an arms dealer, or the source of funds is just not acceptable. There is some form of illegality involved. Nigel Farage is obviously, to our knowledge, not committed any of these sorts of crimes. Can I ask you on that, Oliver? Can I ask you on that? Sorry to cut across you, but can I ask you on that? Yeah, without naming people, obviously, but some of the clientele of Coutts, I imagine, over the years, have been some rather fruity characters. Obviously, I couldn't comment on any particular account relationship, but the main account, the most profitable people to bank for any bank, including Coutts, are celebrities who of course are very liable to tweet something ridiculous or silly. I mean, think of Elton John this week. He's in the press defending Kevin Spacey. That would be considered to be grounds for unpersoning somebody, cancelling them if you like. So celebrities, and also, I mean, one of the most profitable groups, again, for any banking organisation are partners in law firms, partners in PwC, partners in, the big accountancy firms. So, they are big, but I mean, that's relatively boring business. Most of Coutts' clients, let's say a lot of the people who bank with Coutts who no longer qualify, but who Coutts is still saying, well, yeah, fine, keep your account. Your political views are acceptable. We're not worried about you. Many of them are sort of asset rich, cash poor. So, sort of a lot of aristos in huge castles, holes in the roof, that sort of thing. So that's probably most of Coutts' banking base.
Interesting. I wonder what they'll do now.
The whole thing is really interesting, just seeing how the bank... I mean, this is really Coutts' worst nightmare. It hates publicity. It hates being in the news. I mean, it really does. We were always told, nothing you do personally, the bank's reputation, so precious. And now to be in the news, on rolling news like this, it's their worst nightmare come true.